Have you ever walked into a room for the first time, only to feel like you've been there before? Or met someone new, yet somehow knew exactly what they were going to say next? These moments of déjà vu aren't just curious glitches in our perception. They might be whispers from our soul's past journeys. In the rolling hills of Virginia Beach in 1931, Edgar Cayce sat quietly with a family who had traveled hundreds of miles seeking answers. The mother described how her 5-year-old daughter would wake from nightmares speaking of the big water that took everyone away. The child had never seen the ocean, yet she described in vivid detail a coastal village and the tsunami that destroyed it. What the parents couldn't explain was how their daughter, born and raised in the Midwest, could fear something she had never experienced in this lifetime. This is just one of thousands of cases. Cayce documented where the unexplainable became clear through the lens of soul memory, the understanding that our souls carry experiences across multiple lifetimes. You might recognize these patterns in your own life. Perhaps it's an inexplicable fear that doesn't match your experiences. Maybe it's an instant connection with certain places, the way the desert air feels like home, even though you've lived your whole life in rainy Seattle. Or the pull towards certain historical periods that feels more like remembering than learning. The American landscape itself holds these contradictions. From the misty Blue Ridge Mountains to the stark beauty of the Southwest deserts, our relationship with place often transcends simple preference. Many Americans feel drawn to locations they've never physically visited. A Massachusetts resident inexplicably longing for the red rocks of Arizona, or a Texan feeling a soul-deep connection to Maine's rocky coastline. Think about your own unexplainable attractions and aversions, that instrument you picked up and somehow knew how to play, the language that comes to you with surprising ease, the culture that resonates in your bones despite no ancestral connection. According to Cayce's readings, these aren't random but significant patterns, breadcrumbs from your soul's journey. What makes these patterns so compelling isn't just their strangeness, but their consistency. They follow us throughout our lives, influencing choices in ways we rarely recognize consciously. The skills that come naturally to you while others struggle, the ethical principles you've held unwaveringly since childhood, the recurring relationship, dynamics that seem to follow you despite your best efforts to choose differently. Cayce didn't view these patterns as restrictions, but as opportunities for growth. Each inexplicable fear represents a lesson unlearned, each natural talent, a skill developed through many lifetimes of practice. Each relationship challenge, an opportunity to heal what was once broken. When you pause to reflect on the patterns in your own life, which ones stand out as possibly extending beyond this lifetime? Is it the dreams that feel more like memories? The instant recognition of certain musical notes or artistic styles? The sense of purpose that arrived fully formed in your childhood? As you go through your day-to-day, notice those moments that feel strangely familiar. The déjà vu at an intersection you've never crossed. The song that brings tears though you don't know why. The strangers who feel like old friends. In these moments, your soul might be remembering what your mind has forgotten. When David, a 40-year-old accountant from Columbus, Ohio, decided to take his first piano lesson on a whim, something extraordinary happened. His teacher watched in amazement as his fingers found their way across the keys, with a familiarity that defied his status as a beginner. "It feels like I'm remembering rather than learning," David explained. What makes this story remarkable isn't just David's natural aptitude, but the overwhelming emotional response that accompanied it. Tears streaming down his face as he played Chopin's Nocturne No. 2, a piece he'd never consciously heard before. According to Edgar Cayce's extensive readings, this phenomenon represents one of the most compelling patterns suggesting past lives, the spontaneous emergence of skills, knowledge, and abilities that have no explanation in our current lifetime experiences. The soul retains all it has ever learned, Cayce would often explain in his readings, and these abilities express themselves when the conditions are right. This retention of knowledge manifests in countless ways across America today. Consider the child prodigies who emerge in suburban homes with no musical background, yet play complex compositions by the age of 4, or the adults who visit foreign countries and find themselves mysteriously able to navigate cities they've never seen maps of. These aren't supernatural abilities, but natural extensions of the soul's continuous journey. What makes these instances so compelling is their specific, detailed nature. It's not just a vague interest in ancient Egypt, but the ability to recognize obscure hieroglyphic variations, not merely an affinity for Italian cuisine, but knowing exactly how a particular regional dish should taste before ever sampling it. These specific knowledge points often emerge with a conviction and certainty that bewilders even the individual experiencing them. The American educational landscape unwittingly reveals these patterns regularly. Teachers across the country report students who grasp certain subjects with an intuitive understanding that outpaces formal instruction. The third grader who intuitively understands advanced mathematical concepts, or the high school student who reads Latin as easily as English, despite minimal training. Cayce's work suggests these aren't anomalies, but windows into the soul's accumulated wisdom. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself, the first time you held a paintbrush and somehow knew how to blend colors, or the woodworking project that your hands seemed to complete with minimal guidance from your conscious mind. These moments often arrive with a profound sense of rightness, of coming home to a skill that should logically be foreign to you. The emotional component is particularly telling. When we reconnect with soul knowledge, it often triggers an emotional response disproportionate to the current situation, overwhelming joy when hearing a particular piece of music, inexplicable grief when discussing certain historical events, or a sense of reverence when practicing specific crafts or traditions. These emotional echoes serve as markers, highlighting experiences that resonate beyond our present lifetime. Consider how these patterns might be present in your own life. Was there a subject in school that you understood immediately while classmates struggled? A skill that others praised as exceptional though you never found it particularly difficult? A historical period or culture that feels intimately familiar despite no personal connection? These aren't coincidences, but potentially meaningful signs of your soul's longer journey. Cayce's readings offer particular insight into how these abilities transfer between lifetimes. He described how the soul's focus in one life creates neural and energetic pathways that remain accessible in future incarnations. The concert pianist in a previous life might not immediately play concertos in this one, but will likely have the hand dexterity, musical sensitivity, and emotional connection to music that makes relearning dramatically accelerated. The soul remembers, even when the conscious mind does not. This understanding transforms how we might approach education and skill development. Those areas where we struggle might represent new territory for our souls, opportunities for fresh growth rather than personal failings. Conversely, our natural talents might better be understood as hard-won abilities from past efforts. This perspective fosters both humility and confidence. Humility in recognizing that our gifts aren't solely our own achievement, and confidence in knowing that persistent effort creates capacity that extends beyond a single lifetime. The implications reach into our professional lives as well. Many Americans describe feeling called to particular vocations or fields of study, often from childhood and without obvious external influence. The pediatric nurse who knew from age 5 that she would work with children, the architect who built elaborate structures with blocks before he could read, the counselor who served as the confidant for friends and family since earliest memory. These vocational draws often transcend practical considerations, persisting despite financial challenges or social discouragements. What's particularly validating about Cayce's perspective is how it honors these inexplicable knowings. Rather than dismissing them as fantasies or coincidences, he provided a framework that makes sense of these experiences while encouraging their development. The unexplained abilities aren't random accidents, but meaningful connections to our soul's ongoing evolution. As you reflect on your own seemingly innate knowledge or abilities, consider keeping a journal of these instances. Note not just the skill itself, but the emotional quality that accompanies it, the ease with which it comes to you, and any fragments of familiarity that arise during its practice. Over time, patterns may emerge that offer glimpses into your soul's particular journey and purpose. In the tapestry of your current life, these threads of unexplained knowledge aren't anomalies but continuations, the ongoing handiwork of a soul that has been learning, growing, and creating for far longer than your birth certificate suggests. They represent not just who you have been, but the accumulated wisdom you bring to the challenges and opportunities of this lifetime. Sarah stands at the edge of the Grand Canyon for the first time, overwhelmed not by its majesty, but by an unexpected wave of grief. "I felt like I was returning to the scene of something profound and tragic," she later explained. "I couldn't stop crying, but I also couldn't leave. It was like the landscape recognized me before I recognized it." This powerful emotional response to a place she had never visited is far from unique. Across America, people experience these inexplicable attractions and aversions to specific places, people, objects, and even time periods, responses that seem entirely disconnected from their current life experiences, yet feel undeniably authentic and profound. Edgar Cayce referred to these reactions as soul memories, emotional imprints carried forward from previous incarnations that surface when triggered by similar circumstances in the present. These aren't just passing feelings, but often life-defining attractions and aversions that shape our choices, relationships, and paths in ways logic can't explain. Consider the specificity of these responses. It's rarely a generalized interest in old things, but rather an inexplicable connection to specific historical periods. Not just a love of travel, but an overwhelming sense of belonging in particular foreign locations. Not a general fear of water, but a visceral terror of ocean waves specifically. This precision suggests something more than random psychological quirks. These are targeted responses to specific past experiences. The American landscape, with its diverse geography and relatively recent settlement by people from across the globe, provides a particularly rich environment for observing these soul memories. A woman born and raised in Manhattan finds herself inexplicably drawn to the plains of Nebraska, feeling more at home among wheat fields than city streets. A man whose family has lived in the Pacific Northwest for generations experiences profound anxiety in humid southern states, his body seemingly remembering hardships from another time. What makes these attractions and aversions so compelling as evidence of past lives is their emergence early in life, often before external influences could shape them. Parents across the country share stories of young children with inexplicable phobias. The toddler who screams in terror at the sight of a Civil War uniform in a museum, the child who refuses to enter tunnels or enclosed spaces despite no traumatic experiences, the young girl who becomes inconsolable near large bodies of water. Equally telling are the unexplained attractions, the child who becomes captivated by ancient Egyptian artifacts before being taught about that civilization, the boy who draws detailed Viking ships without ever seeing them in books, the young musician who gravitates specifically to Renaissance compositions, though raised on contemporary music. Cayce's readings consistently suggested that these attractions and aversions serve a purpose beyond mere coincidence. They represent unresolved experiences seeking completion or acknowledgement. The soul's journey, he explained, isn't linear but cyclical, returning to similar themes and challenges until growth occurs. This perspective transforms seemingly irrational fears or obsessions into meaningful signposts for potential healing and development. You might recognize these patterns in your own life. Perhaps it's the culture you've always been drawn to, though your family has no connection to it. The historical period that feels strangely comfortable in documentaries and books. The craft or art form that captivated you from first exposure. The landscape that feels more like home than where you were raised. Or conversely, the irrational fear that emerged in childhood and persists despite no traumatic experiences to explain it. Mark, a college professor from Vermont, shared his experience. "I've been terrified of fire my entire life, not just a healthy caution, but a paralyzing fear that makes no sense. I've never been in a fire, never been burned badly, yet the sight of even a controlled bonfire sends me into panic." Then, while researching my family genealogy, I discovered an ancestor who died in a warehouse fire in 1878. Something about finding that information brought a strange sense of peace, as if a mystery had been acknowledged. What's particularly significant about these soul memories is their emotional intensity. They're rarely neutral interests, but instead come charged with emotional responses that seem disproportionate to present circumstances: overwhelming joy, inexplicable grief, paralyzing fear, or immediate trust and comfort. The emotions themselves become clues, suggesting the nature of the past experiences that might be influencing current reactions. These emotional echoes extend beyond places to people as well. Many Americans report meeting someone for the first time and experiencing an immediate, powerful sense of recognition, a feeling often mutual and accompanied by an ease of communication that typically takes years to develop. "It wasn't attraction in the romantic sense," explained Michael, describing his first meeting with his business partner. "It was recognition. The moment we shook hands, we both felt like we were reconnecting rather than meeting. We finished each. Others' sentences that very first day. Cayce's readings frequently addressed these instant connections, suggesting they represent soul groups that have incarnated together multiple times, often playing different roles in relation to each other. Parent and child in one life might be colleagues or siblings in another, but the essential connection remains. These soul relationships often bypass normal social development, creating immediate trust, or sometimes immediate conflict that seems unwarranted by the brief acquaintance. Even our relationship to specific historical eras can reflect these soul memories. The American fascination with certain periods, the Civil War, the Revolutionary Era, the Wild West, the Roaring Twenties, goes beyond academic interest for many individuals, manifesting as an emotional connection that feels personal rather than scholarly. People describe feeling more themselves when engaging with artifacts, music, or literature from specific eras, as if remembering rather than discovering. Rachel, a librarian from Arizona, shared, "I've been obsessed with the 1920s since I was a child, long before I knew anything about that era. The music, the fashion, the energy of that time, it all feels intimately familiar. When I hear jazz from that period, it's not just enjoyment, it's a visceral recognition. I feel more aligned with who I am when surrounded by elements from that time." What makes these attractions particularly compelling is their persistence despite social or practical obstacles. The person who pursues a passion for sailing despite growing up in a landlocked state. The individual who studies an obscure language, though it offers no practical advantage. The adult who overcomes significant hardship to relocate to a region they've never visited, but inexplicably consider home. These aren't fleeting interests, but soul-deep pulls that often shape entire life trajectories. Equally revealing are our inexplicable aversions, the places, objects, or situations that trigger fear or discomfort without apparent cause. Many Americans report specific phobias that emerged in early childhood before any traumatic experiences could explain them. The person terrified of heights, though they've never fallen, the individual who cannot bear tight collars around their neck, the otherwise confident public speaker who freezes specifically when addressing authority figures. Cayce suggested these aversions often point to traumatic endings in previous incarnations, the circumstances of death or profound suffering that left such deep impressions on the soul that the fear persists across the threshold of rebirth. Rather than dismissing these fears as irrational, his approach involved acknowledging their potential origins and working through them consciously in the present. This perspective offers a compassionate framework for understanding seemingly irrational, emotional responses. The person afraid of public speaking isn't simply anxious but may be carrying the memory of public humiliation or punishment. The individual who panics in small spaces isn't merely claustrophobic but potentially remembering imprisonment or entrapment. The child terrified of loud noises might be recalling the sounds of warfare or disaster. How might this understanding change your relationship to your own inexplicable attractions and aversions? Consider the fears that have followed you since childhood. The places that call to you without logical reason, the historical periods or cultures that feel like long-lost homes, the people you've trusted immediately or distrusted without cause. Rather than dismissing these as quirks or coincidences, what insights might they offer about your soul's longer journey? Lisa, a nurse from Oregon, described her lifelong aversion to hospitals despite choosing a medical career. "I've always been terrified of being a patient, specifically of surgery. Though I've never had a negative medical experience, the fear seemed completely at odds with my calling to nursing, which I've felt since childhood. Through meditation and reflecting on Cayce's work, I've come to believe I may have died during surgery in a previous lifetime. Understanding this hasn't eliminated the fear, but it's helped me recognize it as separate from my present reality and purpose." Cayce's framework suggests these soul memories aren't simply curiosities, but purposeful elements of our continuing development. The attractions often point toward paths of service or growth that align with the soul's longer journey. The aversions frequently highlight areas requiring healing or completion. Together, they create a map of sorts, not deterministic, but suggestive of areas where our souls have invested significant energy across multiple lifetimes. This understanding transforms how we might approach the unexplained passions and fears in our lives, not as random preferences to be accepted without question, but as meaningful clues to our deeper nature and purpose. The seemingly random attraction to certain musical instruments, artistic styles, historical periods, or foreign cultures becomes part of a coherent, if incomplete, picture of a soul continuing its development across time. As you move through your daily life, consider pausing when you encounter these inexplicable emotional responses. The building that makes you uneasy without reason, the stranger who feels like an old friend, the skill that brings disproportionate joy or frustration, the culture that resonates beyond explanation. In these moments of powerful attraction or aversion, you may be experiencing not just present reactions, but echoes of your soul's longer journey, breadcrumbs on a path that extends far beyond your current lifetime.